Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Social Work 12 podcast. I'm Taylor here with my co-host Faith, and we have a wonderful guest today, Nicki Sanders. Thanks so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us. We are
Mm.
stoked to talk to
I am
you.
excited to be here. I'm so excited.
Please tell us who you are, what you do, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Yay. Also, well, first of all, congratulations. I am so excited that you are launching this podcast. It is filling such a great need. So, how I
Thank
got here.
you.
That's
Um,
encouraging. Yeah, thank you.
yes. So, many moons ago, probably about 3 decades ago, decided that I wanted to be a social worker and a social worker to support teen moms in foster care. So that was
Mm.
my kind of decision as a high school senior and through all my twists and turns. I ended up graduating with a bachelor's degree in sociology 6 years later, not four, with a 2 year old, all the other twists and turns that went along with that. And then I went into the job that I really wanted. And so that required me to really be able to leverage my skills and experience and what does this degree mean, right? So I had to learn how to really advocate for myself right then. And then it was about 7 or 8 years that I worked full time before going back to school part time to become a master's level social worker. And so I did that, um, raising a teenager and working full time. So it actually took me 3.5 years to get my master's degree. And so to everyone who is listening and like, how long is this going to take? I'm too
Right.
old. I got my master's degree at 35. So I am excited to be able to do this work. And even then, I went right into the position that I actually wanted from being able to leverage my skills and experience. Um, and so right now, through multiple twists and turns, I've done residential and school-based programs, community-based programs, public health programs. I'm teaching as an adjunct at two different institutions. One of them is where I got my bachelor's degree from. So I've been teaching as an adjunct for about 10 years. I've been in nonprofit leadership, maybe about 15 years or so, and an internship supervisor for multiple degrees, not just social work, so sociology, human relations, even supervised nursing students, um, and been able to do that in multiple ways. What else do I do? I manage an internship program, very part-time with high school students as well. I love teaching. I love working with interns.
Mm.
And I get to play outside with the kids. That's what I call it. On a farm. So I'm outside on a farm like 2 days a week. Never would have thought that when I went into social work. Um, and I do career coaching and organizational development, and that's kind of what got us here.
Hmm.
Because I do a lot of career coaching and leadership development, a lot with women of color in social work leadership, but also just social workers in general. And then some organizational development, teaching and training, a lot around self-care, preventing burnout, and advancing your social work career in the way that works for you and your life, because I had to build my career around my life instead of the other way around.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Wow. I just love hearing
Yeah.
the different social workers that we have and just all of the things that we can do with
Yes.
this degree. It's so cool.
Yeah. You've done quite a bit. And that's really cool to hear, like, over the years, the different parts of social work you've touched,
Mhm.
because you could do so many different,
Yeah.
things in the field. So that's really cool to hear about all the different ways you've been able to operate or work as a social worker.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Hmm.
I connected with Nikki on Instagram and then over time I don't know how I came across this article that you had,
Okay.
the is social work a job or a calling?
Yes.
And I feel that's kind of our inspiration for this
Okay.
episode
Yeah.
because we know that it's hard to talk about money in social work, and we get messaging about not being in it for the income and only the outcome. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I think when I read it, I was just like, wow, you get it. I have to read, I'm just gonna read the first just couple lines. Okay. It's just
Yes.
amazing. She
Yeah.
says, "Dear social workers, social work is a job, a profession, a career. I do not go to work to volunteer. I'm not a missionary. I'm not a nun. Just because I will no
Mm.
longer accept poverty wages does not mean social work is any less of a calling, passion, or purpose for me." Oh, it just
Yeah.
it
Yes.
hits.
Yes.
Why? Let me see. When did you write this? I don't know. I can't see, but
I think it was 2022 because
2020.
people have been kind of bringing it up. So I feel
Okay.
like
Yeah.
there was a lot happening. It was February. I do remember that
Uh-huh.
because I had been kind of talking about self-love and self-care and all those things.
Mm.
But also, I had been saying for years that social workers do not take a vow of poverty. Now, I did do a
Yeah.
year of Catholic school. I graduated from a Catholic, institution. So I'm like, social workers, we don't take a vow of poverty.
Mm.
And you said we get messaging, and that was so sweet of you. I love that you said that. I call it indoctrination. Um,
Ooh,
and I
yes.
think
Okay.
that we are
Okay.
indoctrinated into this idea that
Hmm.
financial
Mm.
struggle is something to glorify, right? Like we don't have to glorify that. We don't have to, we're no less important as a person or as a social worker if we want money. If
Hmm.
right, we're going to work, we should be paid well for our education, our experience, our expertise. Um, and it starts with us in the classroom, really. And definitely
Hmm.
as a professor, I say the same thing to my students that I say to my clients, right? That we are no longer glorifying poverty in social
Hmm.
work. We can
Hmm.
be in it for the income and the outcome because otherwise,
Hmm.
your outcome may be flawed, maybe a little less than we hope for if you are so worried about your own financial struggle. If you're
Mm.
worried about, are my lights going to be turned on or off? Am I going to be able to feed my own children? Am I going to be able to get to work if something happens to my car? Right? Those kinds of struggles impact us because we're human. And so if you aren't financially secure and you're trying to bring your best into the workplace for your client, it's virtually impossible to do
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
You can shut your emotions off for a while, but eventually it's going to come to the surface. And so I was upset. I
I
was a
felt
little angry.
I felt it. I feel
Yes.
like there's just like so much passion in
Yes,
the words. It's like,
yes,
ooh, she was feeling some type of
yes.
way that day.
I really was. And I think I had read something. I feel like I read something on LinkedIn because I posted that on LinkedIn. And there were these very experienced social workers really berating someone for saying they wanted to earn more money in social work and you should have went into another position and you shouldn't expect to make money. And we've all heard that, right? I heard the same thing that if you want to make money, don't go into social work, that
Hmm.
social workers
Hmm.
don't make money. And I think what we often forget is the history of social work, right? And so this idea that social work is only mental health, that social work is only this clinical thing, and you have to do this, is such a disservice to social workers and to the social work profession. And so we talk about, or we learn about in the classroom, meso, macro, and micro social work, but then we forget about it and say you can
Hmm.
only go in and do these things. And so my basis for working with the majority of my clients really is around remember meso, macro, and micro social work. Let's go back to the basics. But also that social work is more than child welfare. Social work is more than mental health. Social work is more than just hospital or school social work, that there's so many things
Hmm.
that social workers can do, and our skills really are transferable skills and they're high income skills. We just haven't been taught how to leverage them.
Ooh,
Mm.
what does that mean? High
Yes.
income skills. What do you
Mhm.
mean by that?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So at its core, right, I think social work skills really are people skills. And so one of the things that we do well, clearly, right, is read people, support people, understand people, our coordination skills. So when you look at things like project management, right, we can kind of put those things beside all of the coordination, all of the research, all of the things that we do in social work. When you look at the job that a CEO does, running an organization, you can kind of put some of those skills beside what a social worker would be doing if they were not just running a nonprofit or running a small business, but what they're doing helping their clients manage their entire lives. And even if you're a therapist, most therapists are providing referrals or connecting to community organizations, or maybe they check in with another provider that their client is working with. We have so many of the skills, especially those soft skills,
Hmm.
that are lacking in the workplace, right? So we hear a lot
Hmm.
about people being fired because they don't have the necessary soft skills. Social workers have those skills. And so what I say to my students, and I'm teaching undergraduate students, is that the hard skills will get you hired. The things that are on the resume that we can check off, those quantifiable skills, will get you hired. The lack of soft skills are the things that are going to get you fired. You can be great at the technical parts of your job, but if you suck at connecting with people, you're probably going to lose your job, right? Like, so do
Yeah.
we keep the person who maybe is a jerk and is, disrupting the team, but they know their job, or do we bring in someone else who can collaborate, who can encourage and support, who is willing to do a little bit more research or ask another question? Those are all the things that social workers do on a regular basis every single day.
Hmm.
And when we look at those skills, we think that they have to be in these small little boxes, and we don't have to keep them there. Social workers are being hired everywhere, like
Hmm.
everywhere.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
yeah, I'm very passionate about it because I was told the same thing. And I was
Yeah.
told that I had to get a social work license. I am an unlicensed social worker. um,
Mm.
and that is a whole nother thing that we can talk about if you choose. But I'm open to that as well.
Yeah.
Um, but I have navigated my career in a way that works for me. And so all the things that people told me I couldn't do, I did them, and did them as a Black woman, and did them as a single mom, and did them as a non-traditional student, and all of those things because I did not fall for the indoctrination. And so in saying that, I did do a clinical um, foundation year
Yeah.
internship or practicum. I guess we call it practicum now.
Mhm.
Um, because not just because everybody said, well, you have to do it and you need those skills. That really wasn't the reason. But when we think about social work and the indoctrination of starting to tell us that we have to work for free happens in our practicum, right? So you have to do all of these hours, and they're unpaid hours. And what I say to my students is they're not really unpaid hours. We are paying to work for free because we paid our tuition, right?
Hmm.
Mhm.
So it's not
Mhm.
really not just unpaid. We paid to work
Mhm.
unpaid. And so
Yes.
when we think about it, and so they were like, oh, you need to do this. And I was like, I really don't. I know I don't want to be a therapist. Like, I'm not going to change my mind. I know who I am. Like, but because I was working full time and could not afford to not have a full-time salary, I had the privilege of working with an organization that was large enough that they allowed me to do my field placement there, which meant that in the program that I was in, I had to do my field placements outside of my regular work. And so my organization was awesome enough that they allowed me to do my full-time job for 20 hours, and then my practicum for the other 20 hours in another part of the organization working under a different supervisor. And so they got their 40 hours and I got my 40-hour paycheck. Um,
Mhm.
and that's how I graduated. But had they not been willing, what would I have done? Quit my job to get a degree? Don't really think so.
Mhm.
But the person who was willing to supervise me was super amazing, like amazing. But he was a therapist and a clinical supervisor. And so that full year I did individual and group therapy. And I was like, I hear you. You said this is a need. It's not. I'm never doing this again. Thank you. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
You're amazing. And ironically, when I experienced burnout, because I have experienced professional burnout, which is why I'm so passionate about moving others off that path, I actually went back to him and he was willing to do supervision with me, not the traditional clinical supervision
Mm.
for, your licensing, but every week we were doing supervision. I'm like bringing this stuff to him. Um, and that was, it was valuable, right? But it also proved to me yet again that I didn't want to be the therapist. So
Yeah.
it is, we are indoctrinated as soon as we enter the classroom. And so many
Mm.
professors are deterring students. So many social workers are deterring potential social workers from going into the field because they haven't been able to navigate these spaces. Or they think
Mm.
that social work, like real social work, like I'm on a real social work job. What is a real social work job? Well, what does that
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
social workers are doing so many things. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah,
Mm.
I was a little annoyed that day. Um, and that's kind of how it came out. And
I
maybe I will
loved,
share that again.
yeah, no, I love that you got a little annoyed that day because I really found that your letter was exactly how I felt. And it put to words what I struggled to put to words
Hmm.
myself of what
Right.
I've experienced even in the profession. And so I felt personally that it was exactly um what needed to be said. And I loved the way you phrased it. And I'm going to do what Taylor did. The few different quotes that jumped out at me
Okay.
personally that I was like, this is great is,
Right.
and it kind of is talking about, I think what you're already mentioning, this indoctrination.
Hmm.
Um, but the expectation that I can and should give my best to anyone at my own expense is outrageous. I was like,
Right.
yes, I love that. And then social workers did not take a vow of poverty. Why would the expectation be that I advocate for my clients and not for myself? It's like, okay, we are taught to be advocates, but
Yeah.
yet we don't advocate for ourselves. So I I love that you've brought like this issue to the forefront. It's definitely what Taylor and I are are trying to do. It's put,
Yeah.
language behind what we're trying to do. And so I'm curious, you've talked a lot about this indoctrination.
Hmm.
Um, why do you think the mindset persists, and how can social workers collectively shift it? So like what can we be doing to like shift this
Yeah.
narrative and this
Okay.
messaging that we receive from the beginning that, you're not in it for the money.
Right.
Hmm.
So I think when we think again back to like the history of social work, there
Yeah.
were very wealthy women, right? Who,
Mm.
let me take that. No, let me keep going, then I'll add to it. So there were very wealthy women on one side, right, who needed ways to fill their time, to feel good, to do all these things. And so we kind of still have the spillover of that kind of savior complex, right? So
Mm.
this is a thing that we're doing because it feels good, because people are less fortunate and we need to go save them and all those things. The other piece of that is there were communities, and more specifically communities of color, where people were doing the same work because that's what they needed to do to survive, right? So for this entire community to survive, this is the work that we have to do. And so when we wanted to continue to professionalize, right, social work, um, I think this idea, it wasn't very well respected. And so we know that. And when we look now at the, what is the word I want to use? I don't want to call it conflict, but that's the word that's coming to mind. So I'm going to call it that. Into, are you a real social worker if you don't get licensed? The social work licensing pack, right? Like all of the things around
Hmm.
licensing, whether you think it's essential and required, so that we are given the kind of respect in the community that we deserve, or you think that it's gatekeeping, because there are people on that side of the aisle as well, it is still social workers against social workers versus us collectively speaking out to the world and saying, this is who we are, all of us,
Mm-hmm.
and this is what we deserve because we are all doing this great work. We all know this amazing information. We're all resourceful and creative and caring and passionate people. And collectively, I think that I hope that what we're now seeing is a shift where social workers are. You two are an amazing example. I'm so excited just about this podcast. And I feel like the younger generation of social workers make me happy. So, I'm like, yes, advocate, please do. Um, and I love the disruption that's happening. Like, I'm excited about the disruption that is happening. And I think we need to continue to do that because this idea that I struggle, so you have to, or you pay your dues, or you have to start at the bottom and wait 20 years in order to get this salary is outrageous and ridiculous. Um, the idea that you are more honorable because you accepted a low wage job. And
Yes.
and some people just don't have that privilege. It is a privilege. That is truth. It's a privilege to be able to accept a low wage job. Now, whatever that privilege looks like for you, whether it's, an additional income, whether it's, family wealth, whether it's the ability to really downsize because you don't have dependents, whatever it is, there's privilege wrapped up in being able to accept a low wage job
I love
and
that. Yes.
come in and just do your work every day. And so I love that social workers are now saying, no, we're tired. We're all burned out. It doesn't have to be this way. And we want to be respected, and that respect doesn't just come from um, a credential. It is because we are human beings. And at some point, we have to be willing to advocate for ourselves, and we have to be willing to challenge the schools, the institutions, whether that's CSWE, whether that's NASW, and any other number of organizations to advocate collectively for us because too many good social workers are leaving and then deterring potentially good social workers from coming into the organization. And so I think it is so pervasive because it has been allowed to fester outside of social work, right? So um, those at the top haven't advocated for our salaries. So if there's a social worker in a hospital and a nurse, right, we see the comparison in the salaries. And so we have not had the collective advocacy from the organizations that are paid to support us and advocate for us. But also individually, um, if more of us are able to say no, right? One, it gives others permission to say no, but then it also says, well, wait, we can start to do things another way. And then that old wall has to come crumbling down because we're saying, no, enough is enough. And here are the ways that I can use my degree. And if you really care about this and you care about people, then there will be some changes. So I am hopeful that slowly but surely things are changing. I am seeing more conferences, more individuals, more social work groups, that are talking about income and salary and wealth building and all of those things. And that doesn't mean that you should feel ashamed if you do take a lower salary, right? So we just want to eliminate the shame, like right, period, and
Yeah.
let people do what works for them and what is best for them. And so if because listen, I've been underpaid for sure for quite some time. So I'm not saying that I'm outside of this, but I loved the work. But the truth is, loving the work isn't enough. And loving the work, I don't want to say more than I love myself because that's actually not true, but giving the work more attention and making it more of a priority instead of prioritizing myself is one of the things that led me down the road to
Mm.
burnout and compassion fatigue and all of those things. And so the job that I truly loved, um, I really had to ask myself, like, why am I staying for them? Them meant my staff,
Yeah.
them meant the program participants because I love them all. Why am I staying for them instead of leaving for me? And when I had to think about that
Mm.
question, I was like, I have to go. I have to go.
I
Mm.
think that's huge because I think that a lot of social workers feel guilty about
Hmm.
leaving when
Yes,
they're
yes,
when they need to leave for whatever reason. And maybe it
yes.
is about, financial,
Hmm.
the salary. Maybe you need to leave for more money, but there's just
Yes.
this guilt of, well, I'm leaving my clients and what are they going to do without me and
Yes.
all of that. Like, how do you help people that you work with
Yeah.
kind of get past that to be able to prioritize themselves?
That's super important. And again, I had to do it for myself first. And so one of the things that I had to realize, especially in that position, there were two things that were super important, is that my staff was comprised of younger women of color, millennial women of color. Um, and they were also watching me, right, in ways that we may not have been paying attention to initially. But also, we were working with young women of color, sixth grade through 12th grade. And I'm saying, wait, they're watching me struggle. They're watching me sacrifice myself. They're watching me do all these things. But then I'm saying to them, something completely different. I'm telling them to advocate for themselves. I'm telling them to speak up. I'm telling them that they're awesome and they're amazing. And then they see me here, and I'm like, I'm not operating in integrity at this point. So part of that is being the example of what you want your clients or your staff to do and be. And I had to really take a step back and say, I'm not operating in integrity. And it was more important for them to see me choose me in a way that they still knew that I cared about them. They still knew that they were important. Um, but they needed to see me choose me. That was the first part. The other piece is if you really are doing your job well, um, then your succession plan should be able to be put in place. And then, truthfully, that's all that you can do. What happens after you have done all you can do is absolutely not on you. And so I was very intentional about how I prepared my staff, how I prepared the organization, the succession plan, and then knowing that I left it in the best possible position that I could leave it in for someone else to come in and pick it up. And then after that, it was no longer my responsibility.
I love that because it's not your organization. You're not the
Nope.
CEO. This isn't your
Mm-mm.
responsibility. And I think we
Nope.
just take on so much of this
Yes.
feeling that
Yes.
if we leave and
Mm-hmm.
the demise of this organization is going
Yes.
to be on our shoulders. It's going to be all our
Yes.
fault, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
you're there to do a job and now you can't do it anymore for whatever
Yes.
reason. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
okay to transition out. And I love that you were able to be that example for your staff and
Yeah.
also just, being able to share this story with us, for us to share it with other people too. We need more social workers to be that example so
Yes.
that the rest of us can feel okay to put ourselves first, like we
Absolutely.
tell
Yeah.
everyone
Yeah.
else
Like we
to do for
tell
them.
everyone else, operate in
Yes.
integrity. And again, am I operating in integrity or am I operating from this savior complex? Because that was the other piece of it
Mm.
too. I'm like, well, why? Right. So I think part of it is that is also kind of what we've been given, right? That this is your responsibility, that you hold it together, that you do all these things, work outside of work, right? You do all these things to hold it together, but it's not your job to rescue anyone. And what we're trying to do is help people participate in their own rescue, right? So if empowerment is our goal, am I standing in the way of their empowerment? By staying in this space? And
Mhm.
sometimes the answer is no. But in that moment, I wasn't empowering myself and I was not empowering my team, um, because I was getting burned out. And my work had begun to suffer because I was burning out. And so they saw me come to my own meetings late. I scheduled the meeting. How am I going to show up late for my own meeting, right? I scheduled the meeting. Um, and, there were just other things that start to happen. I'm like, I'm not even giving my best anymore. So if I
Mhm.
can't give my best, that is the other reason that it's time for me to go. If I can no longer give my best, I am doing a disservice by staying in this position. And so you really do have to ask yourself those hard questions. Is this for you or is this for them? And why are you still here? So for me, it was I'm no longer giving my best. And I let it get to the point that honestly, I went to work and I sat in my car on the parking lot for 2 hours because I could not make myself go inside. And I was like, this is insane, right? Like I am long past the time that I should have left when I can no longer get out of my car.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm.
I think, we talk a lot about what we can do as social workers to kind of like move ourselves forward and advocate for ourselves. And I think the onus isn't all on us, right? It's organizations, So I love that, during your practicum, you had this organization that was willing to support you and pay you
Mhm.
and kind of work with you. I
They
think
didn't pay
that's
me
really
enough though. I mean, they
right.
paid me enough to do what, they got me through, but
Yeah,
that
yeah.
salary, as
You're
soon as
like,
I was
Yeah.
done, I was
don't get it
done.
twisted.
Right.
That's not the
Grateful and
message. No.
done. Right.
No,
Yeah.
that's fair point. I'm
Yeah.
curious, what have you seen or experienced with organizations that, have been positive in terms of,
Mhm.
supporting social workers and providing environments where, we don't burn out?
Right. I think that's super important, right? And so a lot of times when we talk to social workers, we're like, you have boundaries and, you make sure you take lunch and you make sure you take your time off. And that's only a piece of it. The other piece is, are you giving us too much work? Are you
Mhm.
being
Yes.
realistic? Are we understaffed and I'm doing the job of three people? Are you, giving me, you're just throwing in clients that really shouldn't be our clients and you want me to try to fix them, right? And so some of this is organization wide, and some of it is the expectation of the social work profession. Again, NASW added self-care to our code of ethics, but with nothing truly behind it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I have seen organizations do everything from, professional development, to, ensuring that they do have adequate staff, trying to pay as much as possible so that people are fairly compensated, ensuring that there are additional services. And so when I went through my own burnout and I reached out for my own um, supervision, my organization was actually, I was like, listen, we have to do something. Because my executive director, CEO, actually, so that was her title, president and CEO, did not have any human services experience at all, right? And so I had multiple staff, multiple things happening, and they were just all giving it to me. And I'm like, I am not supposed to be doing clinical supervision. What is happening right now? And so what we were able to do is when I got the supervision for myself, I also brought in a clinical supervisor that could provide group and individual supervision to my staff who were not all social workers. Not all of them were social workers. So that was the other piece is, my staff who had, other degrees, they weren't harder to manage. It was harder for them to understand that the boundaries had to be different, right? And so they burned out much faster than my social work staff. I will
Mm-hmm.
definitely say that, um, because we were not supposed to be doing therapy. Um, and there were lots of things that I'm like, this, that's not in our role. That's not in our role. Um, but it was making sure that they had professional development, making sure that they had supervision collectively, and they could also go to this person if something had happened with the client individually, in addition to still having a one-on-one with me. And we still had our staff meetings. We did mental health days. I was like, we are all tired. I will see you all on
Mhm.
Monday, right? But also, I had an executive director that was okay with me making that determination and that decision. We closed the week between Christmas and New Year, right? And they didn't have to use their leave. We added in like partnering holidays. So maybe not maybe it was like the Friday before Labor Day was a day off. You didn't have to use your leave. And then you got Labor Day off. Making sure that we were also recognizing the work and recognizing people for their work is also important. But again, ensuring that one, you hire people with the skills to do the job that you're paying them to do, and then you set them up for success in doing that job. So I've seen, even in colleagues and in my clients, organizations that they feel like their supervisor cares about them, but they also feel like the organization cares about them. And I think
Mhm.
that is even more important because if you're dumping everything on the supervisor, then that person will burn out, even if they're the buffer for the team. Um, so yes, pay people, pay them,
Mhm.
give them good
Yeah.
benefits, support them, listen to them, allow them to share their um, own ideas because the people doing the direct service generally know what the problems are. And if you give them an opportunity, they can provide solutions on how to make their jobs better. So I think all of those things collectively are what organizations need to continue to do in terms of prioritizing and put people first. So what I would say is I can't expect you to treat our clients well if I'm not treating you well. And so I
Hmm.
think organizations need to remember that
Yeah.
part.
Mhm.
I love that. And I think what, you're speaking to is this idea also of like self-care and how we're
Mhm.
sent this message of self-care. It's now, something that they talk about in social work programs. And I remember in grad school, Taylor and I and some other students would talk about how that can feel a little shaming,
Yeah.
kind of around like, oh, the reason you're suffering with your job or facing burnouts because you're not
Mhm.
taking
Yes.
care of yourself. But
Yes.
actually, I wish we could restate it as self-advocacy instead of self-care,
Yes.
because what you're talking about is self-advocacy, like
Hmm.
more pay,
Yes.
time off, hiring more people to share the
Right.
load so that you can actually take care of your clients,
Absolutely.
or can actually feel like you're equipped to do your job.
Hmm.
So I think that is just incredible what you're saying, and I'm like so for it. Um, if we're kind of wanting to not only talk about the history of social work and kind of this profession as a whole and how we've kind of found ourselves in this space, but we want to change the culture of
Yes.
social work, right? And so, um, if the culture of social work evolves, right, to
Hmm.
embrace this idea
Yeah.
of, not being in it for or being in it for the income and the outcome,
Right.
what do you imagine the profession could look like in 5 to 10 years? Like, what would you hope to see
Yes.
our profession look like? This is something you've been working on
So,
Mhm.
okay.
well before Taylor and I. So
Right.
like, what do you hope it looks like?
First of all, I love that idea. I really do. I think that I do believe we are moving in the right direction. I think what we are going
Yeah.
to see is more diversity in
Mm,
social work. I think what we will see is more um, social work center practice, right? Because I can't be at my best if um, I'm like, if I'm not at my best, I can't give my clients my best. And so I think this realization
yes.
that I am not a machine and you can't just expect output, output, output without inputting anything positive into me. Organizations are, we had during the pandemic, we were talking about quiet quitting and all of those things, right? So we're seeing the changes happen within social work and in, you know, our economy and our workplace in general. I think that this idea that we all need to collectively support each other is what I'm hoping that we're moving towards and across generations. And so I am definitely a proponent of multi-generational workplaces and what we all bring to the table in terms of individual assets as well as different assets from different generations. So I'm hoping that there is more diversity. I'm hoping that there are more opportunities. I'm hoping that we are starting to see social workers branch out and that now other organizations are reaching in and saying, oh, wait, well, bring us the social worker. We didn't know that you all could do this thing.
Mhm.
I hope that we are going to see our salaries increase because people are going to say, well, yes, right? Like, I am not going to take this job. And if more people are able to, and able is a key word, if more people are able to turn down some of those lower wages, then one or two things are going to happen. They're going to have to increase the wages, or they're going to have to decrease what they are offering or requiring. Maybe requiring is a better word, what they're requiring for people in those positions. And so many moons ago, when I was looking at my MSW, I'm like, I'm going to go into grant writing and development because I know that that salary as a starting salary is higher than, these kind of direct practice. And then I took a lovely program management or development, whatever the class was. And I had to write a grant and submit it. And I was like, I'm not doing this. Like, why would I do this? And so I love working with people, but I also love leading people. And so what I see right now is more social workers and social work students reaching out to each other and collaborating and asking questions and not just accepting that something has to be a certain way because it was always that way, and navigating their careers with power and with intention. And so I think that is the piece. If enough students start pulling out of social work programs, something is going to have to change. If enough organizations can't fill those positions, something is going to have to change. And we're seeing that right now. There are a lot less, we see that in the shift to many higher education institutions now offering online social work programs because they had to be able to compete with these other online programs. And so slowly but surely, I believe that the profession is moving in the right direction. I'm hoping that we speed it up a bit. Or else social workers are going to continue to suffer and clients are going to continue to suffer, which means the profession itself is going to continue to suffer. And right now, the level of burnout and the level of this mass exodus is not good for anyone.
Totally agree. And
Yeah.
it makes me think about I saw this tweet or something a while ago, and it said, you know, maybe we should shift the language from burnout to exploitation because it puts the onus
Mm.
on organizations instead of us. It's when we think of other people who are outside of social work, if they're underpaid and overworked, we usually call that exploitation, right?
Yes.
And
Mm.
so that was just kind of a
Yes.
interesting
Yes.
perspective. And I love just like the different ways that we're like how
Hmm.
you said, let's call it indoctrination.
Right.
That's what social work programs are doing. If we start using that, when we say indoctrination, it's like, oh wow, that's a
Yes.
serious word.
Yes.
Exploitation, that's a serious word. Where
That's
this
a
is a
serious
serious
word.
problem,
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It
So,
is. It is.
Language
Um,
is really important. It's
Language is
right,
important how
important.
we frame it.
Um,
Uh-huh.
right.
and we all have heard that one phrase, right? Social workers are in it for the outcome, not the income. All of us, multiple generations, right, have heard
Yeah.
that same thing. And so that language is important. We know how important that language is. My brain, for whatever reason, thinks in three words. Don't ask me why. And so I remember saying exhaustion, exploitation, exit plan, right? Like that's what it is. It's
Ooh,
like exhaustion, exploitation, exit plan. It's time
right.
for
Yes.
the exit plan. And
Yeah.
Mm.
so when people are starting to exit or say, you know what, enough is enough. I can go over here and do this
Mm,
thing. I can get this project management certificate. I can go into corporate social work. I can go and do coaching, and I'm not as stressed out as if I'm doing
mhm,
therapy. Why am I going to stay here in this thing? Because for most of us, it's not just choosing ourselves, it's also choosing our families. And so we also forget that social workers are people who are also caring for people when they get home. And so if
Yes.
I can't afford to, send my children to the doctor or to the field trip or, get them the things that they need, I have to do something different. And we don't want to put people in a position where they have to leave. We've done that for decades and decades. And because even when we think about social work as a profession and the numbers of um, men in the profession, um, and the numbers of men in leadership in the possession in the profession, right? And so when we think about same thing with education, overwhelmingly female, but a lot of the leadership roles are male dominated. And so that is another thing that is going to have to change. Because if there is no place for people to go, and I'm just stuck in this little thing down here at the bottom, then I need to leave or I need to not engage in the beginning. And so I tell everyone I am so biased. I am biased. I love social work. I'm biased, but understand that my bias is because I don't like to be told what to do. I'm just that, let me admit that. So, so if
same.
you tell me that I can't do something, I'm like, what are you talking about? Um,
Yes, yes.
so I'm like, absolutely, I can. Um, and so, and so this idea of learning the system so you can navigate the system, right? It's really something that many of us have figured out how to do with our clients, right? Let me show you how to do this thing. But why are we not doing that for ourselves? Using our skills for ourselves. It's not just advocating for ourselves verbally, but using our same skills to navigate this profession and build our careers the same way we help our clients navigate and build their lives. Like those skills apply to you. Like use the same thing in your job search, use the same thing in your interview process. We are collaborative and we're connecting. Connect with some of those people and
Mhm.
tell them that you are looking, for another job. And so I have been lucky enough, blessed enough, whatever word you want to use, to make good connections and to have good connections. And in many ways, my name kind of spoke for itself because people knew my professional reputation. And so that has looked like people offering me jobs that I did not apply for. But that's because I put in the work in the beginning. So I'm not saying, you know, don't do any work. Yes, we do work. We work in integrity. We give our best. We do our best. I'm not going to tell people it doesn't make sense to do your best at work. It makes sense to do your best at work in social work because real people are being helped or harmed by your work. Um, and so I'm never going to tell someone, this job doesn't care about you. Don't give your everything. Give your best, right? And your best is not to the point of exhaustion because you're no longer at your best by the time you got to that point. So I think that for us to continue to shift the narrative and keep talking about salaries, listen, I was like, this is great. If you don't have your salary and I, apply, and people would say, never bring up salary first, or
Mm.
or don't give a salary range. And I would say, this is great. I know I can do this job, and everything was going well. And I was like, what is the salary? I have removed myself from candidacy in multiple positions based on the
Mm.
salary. And I'm okay with that, right? Because you get to choose. You get to choose you. Um, I have turned down six-figure positions and I was like, oh, ma'am, you no, right? Like you want me to work that hard for that? Um, and it's not that I'm against hard work, it's
Right.
that I
Yeah.
knew what they were asking me for. The salary sounded good to them because it was a six-figure salary. I knew what they were asking for, and I knew what I would have to do to get them what they needed. And so I was like, I think they know what I'm gonna have to do too. And they're just trying
Yes.
to, um, and red flag, right? And so let's pay attention to red flags. And one red flag is they were emailing me at midnight. And I was like, oh,
Mm-mm.
this is regular. No, ma'am. Right? I'm sending you an email at midnight because in my mind, I'm saying, I'm not going to do this. And before I go to bed, you know what? I'm just going to send this off and kind of remove myself from this. Da, da, da. And then when they responded back, I was like, oh, I made a good decision. And they responded back with a question. So literally emailing me, I just stopped responding. It's midnight.
Wow.
So I'm like,
Wow.
no.
Yeah. I love,
Yeah,
So, yeah.
go
I
ahead.
really think like one thing that keeps coming back to my mind when I'm hearing you speak is like to see a difference in our field, we need to not only like we learn about systems, we learn about person in
Mhm.
the environment, we learn about all these concepts, right? And all these kind of we're excellent at navigating
Yep.
systems. That's what we're trained to do. But yet something about the social work system needs to be shifted and changed. And then
Mhm.
also
Mhm.
your it's like twofold. Something about the system needs to change, and also how you as a social worker needs to change in how you navigate that
Mhm.
system. And like being empowered to A, know what your worth is, what you can be
Yes.
asking for a salary, turning down salaries, knowing that that's
Mhm.
allowed. Like you get to
Right.
do that.
You get
Like
to do
that's
that.
okay. You get to do
Yes.
that. Um, and talking about it so that you feel
Mhm.
less alone in it
Yes.
or like
Mhm.
crazy
Less
Yes.
or
guilty, less
Guilty.
guilty
Yes.
shame.
shame.
Shame. Yep.
Hmm.
And so it's like this twofold kind of thing needs to
Yeah.
change to see maybe an impact or a
Mhm.
difference in hearing
Yeah.
you talk and hearing you share about turning away a six-figure
Right.
salary. That's
Right.
impressive. I'm like,
Yeah.
Right.
okay, like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
yeah, like no. And it was
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
right decision. It was
Yes.
Yeah.
totally the right decision. So
Yes.
Yeah. I know.
yeah.
I feel like this conversation is really, it's really needed in our community,
Mhm.
and just
Yes.
showing people, you again, an example. I turned down the salary that was too low for
Mhm.
me. I left a job that wasn't serving me. Like, these are
Yes.
messages that we need to become comfortable
Yes.
with sharing, throughout our profession, because it's important for the
Absolutely.
survival of all of us.
Yes.
So,
Survival. That
yes.
part, right?
Yeah.
In order for
So,
the organization and the profession to survive, but also for social workers to thrive, right? So we want
right,
the
Mm.
profession to survive, but we want our social workers to thrive within that profession. And so we have to do something different. Mhm.
right.
Hmm.
I love that.
I
Okay,
do
well, we're
too.
gonna end with our
Yes.
money moment. So
Yay.
if this is your first time listening, we end with our money moment. It's just a significant either financial moment or insight from, I don't know, the week, the month. It could be a tip or reflection, a failure.
Okay.
Just, we're normalizing these conversations around money and
Yes.
salary and all that. So, Nikki,
Yes.
what do you got for your money moment?
So I was trying to decide which example I wanted to share. So I'm going to really quickly give you both of them. One is that I just did a video on my YouTube about 5 jobs where social workers can make $100,000. And
Awesome.
so
I'll link that in the
I
show
didn't know
notes.
that I kind of planned it, kind of close to this. So that's wonderful. And so I do want people to check that out because this idea that you have to be broke does not make sense. It's not a fact, right? And we speak it
Hmm.
like it's a fact. But the other piece of that is having a job, a salary, a minimum salary, which I tell my clients all the time, have a minimum salary in mind. And if they aren't willing to meet that minimum salary, then you have to make a decision. And hearing a salary that was below my minimum and still saying yes, right? So I haven't always turned down those jobs, right? So hearing the minimum and saying, I mean, but okay, right? It was a mistake. But I had to learn later that it was a mistake. And in it being a mistake, how I navigated that situation is I worked that lower salary for the entire year. And I took that salary and I was like, okay, we're gonna make this work. And then at the end of the year, I sat down and I reflected and I ended up writing maybe a 4 page, definitely three, but I think 4 page letter why I deserved the $20,000 raise because of all the work that I had given them over that year and because I shouldn't have said yes to the salary that I had said yes to. Now they didn't honor it, and that meant it was time to go. So again, right, you have to choose you. So stand in it and then be willing to stand in it.
Hmm. I love that. Thank
I
you.
love
We
that
will
too.
definitely link all of that in our show notes. And Nikki, tell everyone where they can
Mm.
find you, where you
Oh,
hang out, all
yes.
that. Yeah, how they can work with you.
Sure. So on Instagram and Facebook, and even if you search it on YouTube, it's Nicki Sanders CEO. Um, and on LinkedIn, Nicki Sanders MSW. You can also search YouTube, Nicki Sanders MSW. And I haven't officially renamed my YouTube channel More Than Social Work with Nicki Sanders, but if you search that, it should come up because I am talking about social work holistically, but also know that our lives are connected. And I want us all to realize that we are building our careers around our lives instead of the other way around.
Mm, love that.
Me
I love
too.
that so much. Well, thank you so much, Nikki.
Thank
And
you.
thanks for everyone tuning in, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you so much.